Welcome to today's stream. We're going to be discussing Dylan Avery's Loose Change Final Cut from 2007. There's a lot going on in this film. As I'd said before, I remember showing this in 2006, an earlier version, I think second edition, to some high school students I had. And a number of them were quite skeptical at that time, but some of them who we've stayed in touch have told me many years later, they thought, okay, well, this was the beginning of the questioning. But at that time, it was still too fantastic to believe that what our government was telling us wasn't the 100% truth. And there's so many different avenues that the film goes down. So it's really just a question of what it is that you'd like to talk about. So for those of you who had a chance to watch the film before the discussion, if you want to put your questions in the chat, we can go down any number of directions that you'd like. I think we can start towards the end of the film, actually, where we see the press and we have sound bites of what they're talking about that day. Dan Rather is on the record saying, "We've watched now for the third time today a building being brought down deliberately by explosives." Their eyes weren't lying to them. They weren't told what the narrative was yet. So before they were told what the narrative, they believed their eyes, and their eyes told them that there were these demolitions happening. So we have Dan Rather as one of the press. We have Jane Stanley from the BBC being told that a building had collapsed, but you can see in the shot behind her the building is still standing. So someone told her that it was going to collapse. Who told her that? How did they know it was going to collapse? Rudy Giuliani was told not to go to the command bunker in Building 7. Who told him that? How did that person know it was going to collapse? Because they told Giuliani that it was going to come down. He repeated it when he was being interviewed for a television interview, and you hear only the audio. Who told Giuliani the building was coming down? How did that person know the building was coming down? Who told Jane Stanley's producer that Building 7 was coming down? Even though there were so many things happening at the time, they didn't even realize Building 7 was still in the shot when they were interviewing Jane Stanley 20 minutes before the building comes down. Why do we have numerous reports? We see it all throughout the documentary of people reporting explosions, secondary explosions. So if the narrative is the planes crashed, fires happened, and then the fires brought the building down, why did all these secondary explosions happen? Why are people testifying that all the glass was blown out at the bottom? You're not going to tell me that a plane crashing 100 floors up blows out 3-inch glass at the bottom of the World Trade Center. That's not how physics works. So what were these secondary explosions doing? Unless they were to prep the building for a demolition. So you need to have certain pillars giving way to get ready for all of the pillars to give way. This isn't covered in this film, but many people who worked in the World Trade Center reported in various documentaries later on that they remember there being heavy construction work in the 2 months prior to September 11th on different floors, just heavy machinery, lots of drilling, and one could connect where that was. Going all the way to the beginning of the documentary, in which we have sound bites of various politicians saying, well, no one could have ever envisioned this happening, cut to war games at the Pentagon in which they envisioned something hitting the Pentagon. There were 3 war games happening on the day of September the 11th, including Vigilant Guardian and Northern Vigilance, in which jets were deployed away from this area. I think they also mentioned something like 60 or 70 interceptions in which a plane of some kind, a Cessna or a big commercial plane, went off course and jets intercepted within minutes. But we're to believe that for, I don't remember the exact number, something like 107 minutes, no planes were intercepted in the United States, this highly militarized country, that 4 airplanes just float around, some of whom were apparently devout Muslims who really wanted to stick it to the Americans, but were seen at strip clubs in the nights prior to this and doing drugs, drinking alcohol. Mohammed Atta packing his own will into his suitcase, which apparently was going to survive the fire when he ran into a building. We have, again, at Shanksville, a ID card. So I think the idea of us believing all of this is the crazier part. It's not difficult to believe that when a trauma happens, that people will accept whatever the authorities give you. I get that. I'm not saying that people should have figured this out back in 2001. Not at all. And as I've said before, it took me many years before I even really considered that something had happened. I really just accepted the official story. I even accepted the premise of the Afghanistan war and even the beginning of the Iraq war. To my shame that I supported that. I didn't know. I hadn't looked into it. But once you start to look into it, you realize there's a number of problems with all of these different narratives. These people, some of whom of the Saudi hijackers, apparently the Saudi hijackers, were trained at naval air stations. 3 hijackers lived at a naval air station. The entire story with Colonel Anthony Schaefer and the Able Danger operation, in which 3 of the hijackers were identified, including Mohammed Atta. We have a $100,000 wire transfer from a General Mahmoud Ahmed, who is head of the Pakistani ISI, $100,000 sent to Mohammed Atta in the days before 9/11. No connection. And again, why would Atta take $100,000 when he's going to die the next day? I mean, what is he going to do with that money? All of these things are problematic. And Loose Change doesn't even talk about the phone calls. We've talked about that in previous streams. How are you making phone calls in 2001 from 30,000 feet when in 2024 you cannot make phone calls from 30,000 feet? Shanksville, Flight 93, the last flight that went down to Pennsylvania. Where are the bodies? Where is the luggage? Where is the wreckage? We have one engine that looks like it's somewhat buried in there, but we have wreckage in 2 different places. One that's 6 miles away. How is there wreckage in 2 different places from this plane? There's no explanation given. It just happened. Obviously, we've talked before about the problems in Ground Zero. The statistic here was shocking. 500,000 tons of asbestos, lead, glass, concrete pulverized down there in the air in downtown Manhattan, and people just breathing it in. EPA's people were wearing respirators. Everyone else was just wearing COVID type masks, just those kinds of masks that you can buy from a drugstore that aren't going to protect you from lead, asbestos, glass. 70% of the first responders developed respiratory diseases, and more people died as a result of helping to take people trying to take bodies out of the rubble than died on September 11th. Where is the wreckage at the Pentagon? Again, there's real mysteries there. Dylan Avery, in the narration, you say, okay, well, there was a plane, maybe there wasn't a plane, but the point is there's a cover up happening here, and we're not being shown all of the videos that were available that day. There's total resistance under the cover of national security. This is the same reason we can't be told about JFK. It's for reasons of national security. Now, however that might have played in the 1960s or even the 1970s, in 2024, if you're telling me that you can't open the JFK files because of national security, it's because we're going to find out something that would be catastrophic for people to find out. Maybe we're going to find out that there was a country, shall we say, in the Middle East who might have had some responsibility for that assassination, or might have even lent some hands to that assassination. We can't possibly reveal that. That would be a corollary to, for example, a 1967 bombing and strafing and torpedoing of a U.S. ship off the coast of Egypt. If you want to know more about that, you can head over to Palestine Bookshelf. I did a review on the USS Liberty. Right after this stream, I'm going to be doing a stream on an Al Jazeera documentary about the USS Liberty. So when they tell you, we can't tell you for national security reasons, ask yourself what possible national security reasons it could be that the American people can't find out what happened. Remember that the Taliban asked the United States to produce evidence that bin Laden was responsible for 9/11, and we did not produce that evidence. On the FBI's warrant for bin Laden's arrest, 9/11 is not mentioned, and when the FBI is questioned, they said, we don't have any evidence that bin Laden perpetrated 9/11. I mean, this is all there. So Loose Change just gathers together a number of these things and puts it together for people to say, where is the through line for the official government conspiracy theory? Which is really what we're looking at. What else? I think that's all I want to talk about for the moment. The last thing, I suppose, we have burning fires at Ground Zero until December the 13th. So they want us to believe that 2 planes, all that jet fuel, which we see mostly explode outside of the building. And again, this is if I know that there's a school of thought on the no planes theory. I'm happy to hear more about that in the chat. I'm not opposed to that idea. It's just not something I've studied too much. But we see most of the jet fuel pour out, but somehow it keeps burning until December the 13th. So there are fires and molten metal flowing We have firefighter testimony of that until mid-December. But that came from 2 planes crashing in. It's just not believable. And there are numerous other times in which buildings were on fire for a long amount of time. They did not collapse. World Trade Center 3, 4, 5, and 6, I think, were all impacted by debris. They did not collapse. And yet World Trade Center 7, which was not hit by anything, apparently collapsed after foreknowledge, after the fire department told people it was going to collapse, after Rudy Giuliani was told it was going to collapse, and after Larry Silverstein, the owner of the building, says that he made a decision to pull it that day. So if they were able to set up Building 7 for demolition, they were able to set up everything else. All right, I'll shut up for a moment and head over to the chat. Whatever the truth about this, I cannot imagine what progress is made by doing any false flag operations, basing wars on falsehood, deplorable and truly evil. Yeah, 100%. That's the situation. Truth. You look smart today. I just came back. I was at a dinner with some people, so I didn't have a chance to change out. I don't normally wear that, as you know. Thank you for the kind words. Egypt Air 990 was the test run for remote hijacking. Sylvester, can you maybe put a link to something about that? Maybe I know it, but I don't know the flight number, and I'm unfamiliar with it. Trump said what he said about the JFK files. Yeah, he told us that he was going to release it, and he said that he was going to at least show it to RFK. But we'll see. Let me say at the outset, I don't have a lot of confidence in Trump. He's a big talker. I haven't talked about it too much on this channel, but I've read both of the books that he's had ghostwritten with his own personal approval. I've read a lot about him. I've read the Bob Woodward books on him. I don't necessarily believe that he is going to carry out what he said. And America in 2024 is in a completely different place than it was in 2016. I don't want to, everyone talks about Trump. I don't really want to spend too much time talking about it, other than to know that he won't touch this with a 10-foot pole. I remember the day it happened. I was making tea after having been in town, having had lunch at Burger King. I saw it live on BBC, the second one go down. Yeah, I was in a hotel room with some strangers. We were all stranded in Cleveland, and someone in our room was a NBC reporter from South Carolina, and she called in her story from our hotel room. And we were just in disbelief watching the towers. They just kept showing it over and over come down. Taliban said they'd hand over bin Laden if the U.S. would show them proof. Where was the proof? Molten metal for months. Yes, where is the explanation? In that Egyptian air that crashed, only President Thug Mafia Sisi escaped, then became the man to seal the Rafah crossing. Yeah, I mean, Sisi is a real thug. Nice tie, Steve. Oh, thank you, Tariq. Well, everyone's making a comment about my clothing today. It makes me feel like I dress like a slob normally. There are many videos of the planes flying into the world. Yeah, Leo, I'm not saying that they're, when they say no planes, there is a theory, as I say, I haven't investigated too much, in which there were pre-planted explosives, and those explosives detonated when there was a holographic image shown of a plane going in. Now, again, in 2001, that technology might seem far-fetched. I don't think it would be so far-fetched in 2024, even though your mind starts thinking, is that really possible? But your mind can be tricked into things. And military technology is always decades and decades ahead. So could there have been military technology which could have projected planes that went in there, and then, because there's so many questions about the hijackers and who was on those planes. Those planes were not at their regular capacity that day. Who are those people that were making those phone calls? So as I said, I haven't studied it. If there's people in the chat who have, I'm happy to hear. Again, it doesn't matter to me one way or the other. If these were holograms or if they were real, the point is that it was a controlled demolition. Avery says the same thing about the Pentagon. It doesn't matter what hit the Pentagon. The point is that there's a cover-up about it. If we knew, then we could tell you. But what we know is whatever hit it is being hidden from us. The video cameras that captured whatever hit it is being hidden from us. According to Alan Sabrowski, West Point War Prof concluded Mossad did it with CIA backing. I wouldn't be surprised if Mossad and CIA worked together on the USS Liberty attack. Good evening, Stephen. Thanks for the stream on this important topic. There were planes. Again, I don't care. Like, I don't care whether there were. If people want to say, yes, Stephen, there were planes, or Stephen, there were not planes, I don't care. The point is, there's a cover up. Those buildings were brought down by controlled demolition. It really doesn't matter ultimately what hit the building or what didn't hit the building. The point is, whatever hit the building didn't bring the building down. Whether it was a hologram and there were planned explosions, or whether it was a plane, neither of those things brought the building down. The building was brought down by controlled demolition, by things that were planted in the building weeks and months ahead of time. WTC 1, WTC 2, and WTC 7. All three of them had demolition charges pulled in. They were brought down. You can look at it, you can disbelieve your eyes, but those buildings are coming down as if they were demolished. That's just the reality of things. The footage of two planes reveal that they were manufactured as montage. Yeah, again, Farello, if people are more knowledgeable about it, I'd love to hear more in the chat. And as I say, I'm not invested one way or the other. I don't care. I know there are people who are really, this has to be the case, but I really don't care. Alex, I was at work in Toronto and almost the entire financial left before noon. It was a lunch in a ghost town atmosphere. Yeah, Alex, a lot of people were told. And interestingly, in financial services as well, we have those United Airlines put options that were never cashed in. We have Bob Bayer. We talked about this in a previous documentary, 9/11 Suspects. I can put a link to it in the description after this video wraps. James Corbett talks about the fact that Bob Bayer has a friend who said, I know somebody who said, cash me out, it's going down tomorrow. Why hasn't Bob Bayer been asked to tell us who it was? The debates over precise methods have undermined the truth movement for decades. Yeah, I suppose didn't miss, but it really doesn't matter insofar as you don't need to know exactly who did it. As I said in our last stream, Colonel Mustard in the library with a candlestick. All that matters is we know there was a murder. So we know that this was a crime. We know there are inconsistencies in the official government story. The delay itself, the graphic was shocking. So the Warren Commission report, it took 9 days for that commission to get started. The Challenger explosion, something like 7 days. The 9/11 commission report was almost a year, and then it was only given $3 million, and then they had to beg for another $7 million or $11 million, whatever it was, but they were underfunded. And the original head of the commission was Henry Kissinger, the liar in chief, the war criminal in chief. This was the guy put in charge of the 9/11 commission, and the 9/11 families had to force him out because they knew that he had conflicts of interest with Saudi Arabia. So everything about the investigation is also wrong. Why is President Bush not on the record? Why was Dick Cheney not on the record? Why did they insist on being interviewed off the record and not filmed? Why? If you've got nothing to hide, why would you do that? This is a very important thing that happened to the United States. You should go on the record for history, but we'll never know because there's no transcriptions of that event. And Cheney and Bush insisted on being together for that. Probably so that Cheney could tell Bush what the story was. Lasers versus nukes versus thermite. Well, I mean, Didymus, definitely thermite was part of what brought the buildings down, as opposed to the other stuff. I don't know. U.S. investigation of Egypt Air 990 ruled that the captain was a crazed Muslim murder-suicide. Egypt didn't accept this. The captain was known as an American-loving guy. Sylvester, I have to look a little bit more. I'm just going to make a note to myself because I don't know about Egypt Air. Egypt Air 990. I'll take a look into it a little bit more. Swedish World Known Demolition concluded there was a demolition job to its footprint. Then he was killed in a car crash with his dog. The dog too, Farallo. But this is the reality of things. Didymus, I agree with you. As I say, it's not a question of there being a single clear line narrative. I think that's usually, if I haven't gotten into this discussion actually with friends and family for many years, because I think after I found out in 2006 and I talked to a lot of people, I was known as one of those crazy truthers at the time. But what's interesting is it's actually not so difficult. Excuse me. It's not so difficult to talk about this anymore. I think it used to be back in 2006. But if you talk to the average person now and say, do you think there were problems with the official story of 9/11? Most people will say probably, but they don't necessarily care that much. So if you ask an American about any of those things, And I said that very early on in this channel, back, excuse me, back when I did my video on the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, is people believe that Saddam threw babies out of incubators, Assad gassed his own people. There's always things that are fed to us, and then people mostly accept it. And that's a trait of us as humans, where we're generally going to accept what we're told by an authority figure. And that in itself is not problematic. The problem is when those people consistently lie to you over and over, you simply accepting it is just an act of stupidity. And I participated in that. So I'm not trying to say other people are stupid and I'm not stupid. I have participated in that stupidity numerous times. The question is, do we have the ability to stand back and say, could I have been wrong about this? Am I willing to take a second look? And what are the implications of this? If 9/11 is based on a massive lie, that means the wars that eventuated out of 9/11, the invasion of Afghanistan, in which America overthrew the Taliban to restore the Taliban 20 years later, the invasion of Iraq, the death of 1 million Iraqi civilians. Prior to that, 500,000 Iraqi children killed under US sanctions by starvation. So we are indirectly responsible for the death of those Iraqi children. But remember, it doesn't matter because they're just brown Arab people. Who cares about them? So everything that relates from that, the so-called war on terror, all comes from 9/11. If you don't have 9/11, you don't have any of these things. How different would our world look if we hadn't had those wars? Really? And part of that also played into Israel's hand. Israel did not want Saddam Hussein in charge. He was becoming a lesser Nasser. I don't think anyone was ever going to rise to the level of Nasser in our time period. He was this sort of giant for the 60s in the Arab movement. But it was enough that he had to be taken out, and taking out Saddam Hussein served Israel's purposes. It didn't necessarily serve us. It certainly didn't serve the people in Iraq very well. Their country was plunged into chaos. The one in the Pentagon, you think they have it. They just won't release it. They won't release it for national security reasons. What about the Israeli art student project going on in the tower? Sylvester, I think I remember this not in these documentaries, but maybe in something else. Again, if you'd like to tell people more about that in the comments, I'd love for you to educate us on that. Was CCTV? It was definitely a thing. It just we can't possibly show it. Peter Jennings said on air as it happened. He said, yeah, he said he reported secondary explosions, and we have clips of that in this documentary. He says we're reporting secondary explosions, and those buildings must have come down. He alludes to it because everyone's looking at the same thing, and they weren't being told what the official story was yet. The official story. And did you see? James Corbett is pointing this out all the time. There is a guy being interviewed. He says, "Oh, I saw these things," and then clearly the buildings collapsed due to structural fire. This guy, the thing has just collapsed. And here he is, random guy on the street, probably an intelligence plant, in order to start spreading that story in people's minds, incepting it for people. If OBL did do it, then it was not plausible to arrest this guy and get him to confess it. Well, the thing is, we have television, we have emissions of him, quote unquote, Osama bin Laden. But he didn't take credit for 9/11. You would think that if he did, he would say, yes, I did. And he would have had a video ready to go. Yes, we did it. Here's my video. And if it didn't happen, then he wouldn't have been embarrassed. He could have just deleted the video and no one would have ever known about it. But the idea that you're going to pull this off and you're not going to have a video ready to go claiming that you've hit the great Satan. Bin Laden was a CIA. He was treated for disease, for illnesses, operations in U.S. hospitals. So Bin Laden, he's just the boogeyman that people would bring out. And near a U.S. election, you'd always see a video of Bin Laden surface. For people who are not familiar with the American idiom, this is a movie called Weekend at Bernie's. And you had to sort of prop up this. I don't think I've ever actually seen the movie. I've just seen clips of Bernie being taken around. But that's how it was with Joe Biden for the last 4 years, like just sort of dead person being brought around and being said to be the president. So Bin Laden, I think, served this same idea of Weekend at Bernie's. Joe Biden, they just bring him up. Oh, there's an election. Let's have a video of Bin Laden leak. But who knows what really happened? I don't believe the SEAL Team 6 story. I don't believe Zero Dark 30 is accurate. That's a discussion for another time. Like Afghanistan said, where's the proof? Again, if we had the proof, why not release it? It's been years now. So if you thought we were going to compromise our national security sources in 2001, what about now? It's been 20 years. Release it, and so we can all know that Osama bin Laden was responsible. Indoctrination is beyond any human. We need people like you. Well, Rollo, thank you. I can't take credit. These are all, a lot of other people have done the hard work. People like Dylan Avery, Jason Bermas, all the people who helped put this together. I'm a beneficiary of all the hard work that they did. But I think this is all available to us if we're willing to take a look. A week after 9/11, CNN had a show about what's coming next, featuring Wolfowitz and Richard Pearl. And remember, you can search for it. General Wesley Clark, in visiting the Pentagon, saw some of his former aides telling them there's going to be 5 wars in 7 years. And that's reached out over a longer period, but these were the wars that were pointed. All the spots we're looking at now: Syria, Lebanon, etc. And the only one that hasn't gotten to on the list is Iran, and we know that they're banging the war drums for that now. Harley Davidson guy was doing talking points a few hours after 9/11. Are you talking? Is this the guy who was being interviewed? Harley Davidson guy. The sophistication of the recent pager attacks is at the same level of the 9/11 attacks. Sylvester, if by that you mean it was a long time planning, from what I understand about the pager attacks, that was something like 10 years of planning. And those are the sorts of things Mossad does exceptionally well. Whatever you want to say about them, they are exceptionally talented at what they do, which is murdering people all around the world. Yeah. Like, how many bin Ladens are there? Is this a tall bin Laden? Is this a short bin Laden? What color is his beard? Where is he now? I think you mean the prime minister, Benazir Bhutto. I don't know too much about it, Didymus. The problem is Pakistan kills everybody. That's how it is. But I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. All right. Any other? That was my point. It looks like a Mossad job. Yeah, Sylvester. I mean, that's a book. It's back here. You can't see it, but it's called Rise and Kill First by Ronan Bergman. It's, I don't know, 700, 800 pages. Something I'm going to cover later next year for the Palestine Bookshelf channel, but it's about the targeted assassinations of Mossad. And we can't possibly keep track of how many they are, but they're very good at what they do. 19 years after the attack on New York City, they came up with COVID-19 and 19 Arabs were implemented. I mean, possibly. Bin Laden was former CIA. Yeah, he was a CIA asset. Well, everybody, thank you for your thoughts today on the chat. And if there are things that you think after the stream you hear about and you want to share, we're always learning in the comment section. So feel free to put links, if YouTube will let you, put links in the comment section to stories, other ways that we can follow up and learn more about this together. But if you're hearing this for the first time, I would just ask you to have an open mind. If it's all true, then none of the questions that I asked today will pan out. But if any one of those is true, if any one of the, 14, I wrote down 14 or 15 different talking points today that I talked about. If any one of those are true, that means the entire story falls apart. So the official government narrative also tells us that there was a lone attacker who killed the president, even though he said, "I'm a patsy." And Jacob Rubenstein, also known as Jack Ruby, shot Oswald just a few moments later, claiming he was a patriot, and sort of disappears. So you have to be willing to investigate if you don't have an answer. And remember, if it doesn't interest you and you say, "I'd rather do other things," that's fine. I'm just saying that if you look at the path of the last 20 years and what a big deal 9/11 was in relation to that, the only other event worldwide, apart from October 7th and apart from September 11th, is the great financial crisis in 2008, when the banks stole all this money from all these other people. That's a different conversation for another stream. But 9/11, at least for my generation, is probably the seminal event. And then after that, I think for the next generation coming up will probably be COVID, maybe October 7th, who knows. But for me, I was 20, 21 years old when 9/11 happened. And it's influenced a lot of what has happened since then. Free Palestine. Yes, if you'd like to learn more, I'm going to start a Palestine bookshelf stream in about, I don't know, 30 seconds. We're going to be talking about the USS Liberty. So feel free to come over to that channel. Thank you. Thank you, Didymus. Thank you, Alex. Sykes-Picot is being dismantled all across Arab lands. So we can only hope. All right, everybody. As I said, I'll see you over on Palestine Bookshelf. If you want to know more about the USS Liberty, I'm going to be talking about an Al Jazeera documentary about the USS Liberty over there. Thanks for joining today.